guys, welcome to the sew along of the Raglan Blouse. The Raglan Blouse is a women's pattern but also is released as a toddler's pattern in sizes 98 to 122, so that you can also make this for your kids. Today I will be making size 110 for my daughter and I really hope she will like it. My name is Kina and I have the pattern company Stitches by Kina. You can find me on YouTube, TikTok and Instagram. So if you like this video, please subscribe and follow me in these channels. The Raglan Blouse is a confident beginner's pattern, so it is helpful if you're familiar with certain elements such as bias binding and shirring. But if you're not, don't worry, I will go through these steps really carefully so that you can still follow along. And now let's talk about what supplies that you need. You will need some woven fabric. I would recommend medium to lightweight. This one that I got is just like a medium weight cotton fabric, which I think is really nice and has a cute pink check. You will also need just some regular sewing thread, as well as some elastic sewing thread. And I will also be adding some rickrack ribbon to the color, but this is of course optional. And now it's time to assemble the pattern. And if you haven't assembled a PDF pattern before, it's important to make sure that this scale square here is the correct size. You also want to make sure that the diamonds here align so that your pattern gets the correct size. We will also have the letters of the pages running horizontally, and then you will have the numbers running vertically so that you know where each page goes. And once you've added or tiled your pages together, you want to add your seam allowance, and this needs to be added to all edges except around the neckline and the neckline at the collar where we'll have the bias binding covering. Okay, let's get started. And now I've cut all my pattern pieces out, it's time to start cutting the fabric. And all pieces are to be cut with the right sides facing each other on double layer. And also just make sure that the front collar piece, the back piece and the front piece needs to be cut on fold. So now I've finished cutting my pattern and I just want to show you because there's a few notches around the armhole edge, and everyone has different techniques at how they want to mark these, but you can use a marker or you can use a clip. But I just want to show you my favorite technique, and it's just to use like a simple clip here so that you know where it is. So now we're ready to start sewing the pattern. And I actually prefer to serge or zigzag all of my edges before I start stitching the seams, because I feel like it's faster and also so much easier way of doing it. So now it's time to start stitching. We will start by stitching the side seams at collar. We're also doing the side seams. We are doing the seam at the sleeve. The next step is to press all the seam allowances open. Okay, So now it's time to start to work on the bias binded keyhole. I have started to make my bias binding like this. So we're simply just taking this piece, fold it in half, press, and then take each of those halves and press it towards the middle fold. But I will show you exactly how to do this. What I've also done is that I have made a clip 9 cm at center back. Fold in half and press. Take your bias binding and your back body and flip it to the wrong side and pin wrong side of body to the right side of bias binding on one side only. Add a pin about 1 cm below your opening, and this is how far down you will stitch. Now you want to make a small clip towards where your seam is ending. Next, flip your bias binding over to the other side and stitch that side. Now when you've stitched both sides, you want to flip your back body piece over to your right side, and you want to flip over the bias binding to finish off the edges. Once you've finished stitching your bias binding, you want to flip your piece over to the wrong side again, fold together and stitch a small stitch like where I'm pointing. So next up we want to do the hem at the sleeve, and I just want to show you because I actually did some serging here as well, because I feel like it's super convenient where folding down the edge that you already have sort of the serging to fold over. That makes it much quicker. So I'm just gonna actually do a single fold here because I already done my serging. after I finished my hem, I want to make the shirring stitch at the cuff. So I need to set my sewing machine on the longest stitch length, and then I need to thread my machine with elastic sewing thread in the bottom, and then just regular sewing thread at the top. And then I need to make a stitch here, 7 cm from the bottom edge, and I will make 2 runs of stitching right next to each other. And this you can adapt a little bit depending on how much shirring you want, but I would recommend at least 2. So elastic sewing thread in the bobbin, and then I'm setting the machine on the longest stitch length. So now we have finished our sleeve, and it should look something like this. I think it looks really nice. And I forgot to mention that I do not recommend back stitching with elastic thread. So just make like a double or a triple knot instead. That will secure the stitch. And now we're gonna move over to the collar. So we're gonna make a hem similar to the hem that we made on the sleeve to the collar. So you wanna do the center back of the collar, and then just all the way around here. So now when the hem at the collar is done, if you're planning on adding a trim, I recommend that you add it at this point because it will be so much easier. So I've chosen this white rickrack trim this time, and I'm basically just gonna add it on top of my hem, around just like a few millimeters from the edge, like this. So now when my collar is ready, I want to add my shirring stitches to the neckline of the collar. So basically, if you want to stitch 1 cm from the edge, you want to add a shirring stitch 1.5 cm from the edge, but also another 1/2 cm from the edge. And that way your actual stitch will end up right in between those shirring stitches. And that is how I believe that you get the nicest and most even shirring effect. So when you're making a shirring stitch, you're basically just setting your sewing machine on straight stitch and the longest stitch length. And also make sure to leave a tail on the stitch so that you can pull those threads and create the shirring. So before we can put on the collar, we need to set in the sleeves. So I'm just gonna grab my body piece here and my 2 sleeves. And the most important thing is to make sure that your notches match, so that the double notch matches against the double notch at the sleeve and body, and the single notch at the front. Next step will be to pin the collar to the bodies, and there are a few points that I think is good to make sure that you're aligned, and I will just show you quick right now how I usually do this. Start by finding your center fronted collar and also your center fronted body. Center fronted body and collar should match each other when pinning. The next point you want to match are your side seams. So the side seam at collar and the notch at sleeve should match each other. And lastly, you want to pin your back collar to your bias binding keyhole. When you have those points pinned, it's time to start creating the shirring. Just pull both of the threads and then move the excess fabric over. Next, I would secure my collar using a basting stitch, and I would either do it by machine or hand. Next, take your bias binding and flip your blouse over to the back side. Pin your bias binding, the correct side of bias binding, to the wrong side of the blouse. Make sure to leave around 1 cm of bias binding at the edge. This is so that we can finish off the edge later. Okay, so now we have attached the bias binding at neckline on one side, and it should look something like this. So that's the stitched side, and this is the other side. And depending on how thick fabric you have, you might want to trim off some of the excess. I think for my case this time it's fairly thin, so I'm just going to clean off some of the seam allowances. And I'm going to flip the bias binding over to the other side, pin it and stitch it. Now you want to fold in the end of your bias binding to have a clean finish. Next, remove all of your basting stitches. Once my neckline is finished, we're just gonna finish off the bottom hem. And same as on the sleeve, since I serged this edge already, I'm just gonna make a single fold and stitch. And for the final step, we're just gonna make a button loop out of self fabric and add a button to the center back. And the easiest way of doing this, I think, is to just use, if you have a little scrap of the bias binding, you just cut it in half and then press it the same way as you would do with the bias binding and stitch. And that way you get a loop that is slightly elastic and also in a good width. And I'll show you how.